I never thought a quick stop at the bank would end up being the moment I lost both my money and my son. I slipped into the bank to close an old savings account, nothing more than a quiet errand on a quiet morning. But then I saw them. At the counter, laughing, was Mark, my son, and next to him, Rachel, my daughter-in-law, glancing over her shoulder like a child sneaking cookies. Except these weren't cookies. They were my dollars. Thick stacks of cash being shoved into her designer handbag with a confidence that made my stomach churn. Rachel tugged a withdrawal slip from the teller's hand, folded it neatly, and slid it into her wallet. I caught a glimpse before it disappeared. My name, my signature, or a clumsy version of it, a forged loop that tried to mimic my hand. I didn't understand. I couldn't. Just yesterday, Mark kissed my cheek, called me Mom, and said he'd fix that silly online banking issue. I'd handed him my laptop like a fool, trusted him like only a mother could, and now he was at the counter, smiling like he'd won the damn lottery. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream his name, march across the lobby, tear the bag from Rachel's hand, but I couldn't move. I ducked behind one of those big marble pillars, heart thudding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. Was this real? I peered around the edge. Mark was still talking. Animated, casual, charming in the way he always was when he wanted something. Rachel rested a manicured hand on his arm. The teller smiled like this was any other transaction. But it wasn't. It was theft. Right in front of my eyes. I stumbled back toward the exit, knees buckling. My legs didn't feel like mine. As I pushed through the doors, the sunlight hit me full in the face. But everything inside me was dark, shattered. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I could only think one thought, over and over again. My son stole my future. They didn't see me, thank God. And also maybe, God help me. I stumbled out onto the sidewalk like I'd been hit by a car. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, like I'd sprinted, but my body hadn't moved fast enough to keep up with what just happened. My purse slipped off my shoulder, and I clutched it like it could anchor me to the earth. I couldn't go back in. I couldn't face them. Not yet. Not like this. I sat on a bench 2 blocks away. I don't even remember walking there. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. My first thought was to call someone. Anyone. But who? My sister had passed last winter. My bridge group wouldn't understand. And the neighbors? God, no. Not yet. The shame was still too raw. So I just sat, watching people come and go from the coffee shop across the street, like the world hadn't just crumbled around me, like I hadn't just watched my own son rob me. And in the middle of that panic, that grief, that awful hum of how could he, I thought of yesterday. He'd come by to check on me, brought Thai food, kissed my cheek, said he'd take care of that silly online glitch I'd complained about. I'd even laughed, said, "What would I do without you?" And he smiled. That gentle, practiced smile. Now I saw it for what it really was, a mask. My whole life I thought betrayal would feel like rage, loud, hot, explosive. But this was cold, numb, paralyzing. I pulled my coat tighter and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. That breathing exercise the therapist had taught me after Harold died. Except back then, I was grieving someone who loved me. Now I was grieving someone who used me. Mark, my baby, the boy who used to beg me to stay 5 more minutes when I tucked him in, the man who just drained my account like it was nothing but a jar of spare change. I sat there until my thighs went numb from the cold bench, until I knew I could stand up without collapsing. And then I walked home, not because I was okay, I wasn't, but because something had shifted inside me. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't see. Not this time. Don't give away too much, too early. Make sure he loves you more than your checkbook. Harold said that to me once, 30 years ago, give or take. We were standing in the kitchen. I was slicing onions for stew. Mark was 13 and had just asked for a new video game system, something outrageously expensive. I'd said yes without even thinking. I always said yes. Harold just leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me the way he used to, like he knew something I didn't. You're training him to see you as a provider, not a parent," he said. I remember laughing. "He's a kid, Harold. He just wants toys." But Harold didn't laugh. He just wiped his glasses and murmured, "Careful, Evie. A boy who sees his mother as a wallet grows into a man who forgets she's a person." I didn't like hearing it. I thought it was too harsh. Harold always had a quiet kind of wisdom. Not warm exactly, but clear. Now, decades later, I could still hear his voice in my head. Like he was sitting beside me on that park bench, shaking his head, watching Rachel slide my life into her overpriced handbag. He tried to warn me, but I wanted to believe I could be both generous and respected, loved and giving. And now, here I was, 67 years old, sitting on a bench like a fool, while the boy I raised helped forge my signature and smiled doing it. That account held $48,000. Not a round number, not inheritance money, not a gift. It was a patchwork of sacrifice. $1 here, 10 there, built slowly, painfully, like a quilt stitched in the dark. I opened it the year Harold got sick. Back then, I thought I'd be saving for a cruise. Italy, maybe. We'd always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast, hold hands on cobblestone streets, eat real gelato, be the kind of retired couple who took silly photos with 2 big wine glasses. But that dream died in room 408 at St. Mary's. The chemo bills came faster than the test results. I remember crying in the laundry room, wondering which bill could go unpaid that month, power or insurance. So I went back to work. Not my old receptionist job. No one wanted a 60-year-old woman fumbling with Microsoft Office in an office full of 20-somethings. No, I scrubbed floors, cleaned other women's houses, women younger than me. I folded their laundry, while my own sat piled at home. I organized their pantries while my fridge held half-empty jars and expired milk. I watched their Roombas glide across marble, while my knees cracked under the weight of a mop. And every time I finished a job, I walked 2 blocks to that bank. Same teller, same smile. I'd slip a crumpled check across the counter, $90, $105, once a glorious $160, and say, "Deposit, please." They probably thought I was a maid. I guess I was. But in my mind, I was building a wall, a safety net, a cushion, for the just in case the furnace broke, just in case the car died, just in case I ended up alone. Funny. I never once thought, just in case my son drains it without asking. That $48,000 wasn't luxury money. It wasn't new furniture or spa days or tropical getaways. It was survival. It was what kept the lights on after Harold died. It was what let me sleep at night, knowing I could buy groceries without asking anyone for help. It was mine. And now, it was Rachel's spending money. Folded into her handbag, probably next to a lipstick that cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I sat at my kitchen table that night, lights off, unable to even make tea. All I could think was, they didn't just take my money. They took my work, my sweat, my silence, my pride. And they didn't even flinch. I should have known. God help me, I did know. I just didn't want to believe it. It was last spring. I'd just come home from knee surgery, still swollen and stitched, barely able to stand for more than 10 minutes. The pain meds blurred everything, made me foggy, slow, vulnerable. Mark had come by with takeout and a 6-pack of Gatorade, sat right beside me on the couch and said, "You don't need to worry about bills or forms right now. Just focus on healing." He kissed my forehead, told me he'd get all that clutter handled. I was so tired, so grateful. So when he asked for my laptop and that little blue notebook where I kept all my login info, I handed them over without hesitation. He's my son, I told myself. He's just trying to help. I should have seen the trap then. But I was still half doped up and half trusting. Weeks later, when my mind cleared and the painkillers were long gone, I realized the mail had gotten thin. No bank statements, no pharmacy receipts, no credit card notices. So I asked, "Mark," I said one Sunday afternoon, "why don't I get paper statements anymore?" He didn't miss a beat, didn't blink, just smiled. Too fast, too wide. "Relax, Mom. Online is easier. You wouldn't understand." Then he reached out and squeezed my shoulder. Warm, but rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. Something about that moment. It stuck in my mind like a splinter, because Mark had never been the one to touch me like that. That had always been Harold. And later, my granddaughter Lydia, when she wanted to show real affection. But Mark? He was the type to wave from the driveway. So where had that little gesture come from? Now I see it for what it was. A distraction. A magician's misdirection. Touch her shoulder so she doesn't notice you've just taken the keys to her entire life. Back then, I remember blinking at him and saying, "Oh, okay," because the alternative was too painful to think about, that my son, my own blood, had planned this. That moment at the bank hadn't started at the bank. It started on my couch, while I sat there with a swollen knee and a heart too full of trust. That's when he reached for the passwords, and I handed them over. The next crack came in the middle of a perfectly normal Sunday dinner. I remember because I'd made pot roast, the kind that falls apart with a fork. Rachel barely touched hers. "Too many carbs," she said, wrinkling her perfect little nose. But she had plenty of energy to flash her new earrings. Big, flashy things. Gold, with tiny diamonds that sparkled like disco balls. She tucked her hair behind her ear 3 times in 5 minutes, making sure we noticed. "Oh, wow," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Big promotion?" Rachel laughed, not kindly, not nervously, the laugh of someone who thinks they're smarter than the room. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, sipping her wine. "Mark's finally making real money." The way she said real money stuck in my throat like a bone. Later, I pulled Mark aside in the kitchen while Rachel scrolled on her phone, her heels already clicking toward the front door. "Are you sure you can afford all this?" I asked quietly, not accusing, just careful. New car, remodeled kitchen, earrings that could pay my water bill for a year? His face changed instantly. The warmth drained out like someone pulled the plug. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. I started. "Don't start with your suspicions again." He cut me off, voice hard, jaw tight. "I'm taking care of things, like you always wanted." That wasn't what I'd said, not even close, but I let it go. Because what could I do? Stand there in my own kitchen and argue with the boy I raised about his spending habits? The boy who used to count out dimes at the grocery store with me. The boy I used to rock to sleep after Harold's late shifts. And now he was standing in my house, breathing heavy, like I'd accused him of something ugly. Maybe I had not with my words, but with my eyes. He looked away first. I went back to the dining room and scraped untouched food into the garbage. The diamonds in Rachel's earrings caught the light as they left, and for a split second, I saw what I hadn't wanted to see. They weren't nervous. They weren't struggling. They were celebrating. And I was the one paying for it. That night, the house creaked louder than usual. I sat up in bed, blanket pulled to my chest, the old floorboards settling under nobody's feet, or maybe just the weight of what I now knew, what I had tried not to know. Every little moment I'd brushed aside now came back like whispers in the dark. The bank statement stopping, the gentle pressure to go paperless, the online logins I never remembered setting up, the sudden ease with which Rachel had slipped into luxury, the way Mark's eyes would dart left when I asked a question, like he was searching for an escape hatch. I'd been ignoring it, one flicker at a time, because if I started questioning one thing, I'd have to question everything. And I wasn't ready. Until now. Until that smug smile over dinner. Until the hard edge in my son's voice, the voice of someone protecting a secret, not a mother. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember exactly when things changed. Not suddenly, slowly, like a tide pulling back, quiet, unnoticed, until you realize the boat's gone. Mark used to call every Tuesday. Then it became every other. Then only when he needed something fixed. The garage door, the paperwork, my login credentials. I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, have their own lives. But this wasn't distance. This was evasion. And now that I'd seen them at the bank, hands on my money, my name scribbled in Rachel's wallet, the mask had dropped. I got out of bed and wandered into the kitchen. lit only by the microwave clock glowing 2:07 a.m. I made a cup of tea just for the motion of it. Boil, pour, stir, anything to keep my hands from trembling. I stood at the window and watched the neighbor's porch light flicker off. They'd waved to me earlier that day, called me Miss Evelyn like always. Would they wave if they knew my own son was stealing from me? The betrayal felt like rot under my skin. Not enough to scream, just enough to eat me slowly. I sipped my tea, now gone cold, and said out loud what I hadn't been able to face until now. He's not who I thought he was. And maybe I wasn't who they thought I was either. Not anymore. I opened the notebook at 5:42 a.m. Not a diary. Not one of those gratitude journals my granddaughter Lydia bought me a few Christmases ago. This was a beat-up old spiral I kept in the drawer by the phone. The kind of notebook you forget about until you need it. My hand shook as I wrote the first line. March 3rd, saw Mark and Rachel withdrawing cash at the bank. My name was on the slip. My pen hesitated. How do you write down something that shatters your whole identity? I didn't know if I was building a case or just trying to survive the truth, but the second the ink hit the page, I couldn't stop. April. Rachel shows off earrings. Mark angry when I ask how they're affording it. May. No more bank mail. Paperless, he said. I never signed up. June. Rachel mentioned a kitchen remodel. I never saw a permit. The pages filled faster than I expected, not because I remembered everything, but because I'd noticed everything. I just hadn't believed it at the time. I flipped back through the entries. Patterns jumped out. Money talk always made Mark defensive. Rachel's spending always followed some favor they'd done for me. I'd been giving them access piece by piece. One signature here, one password there. Like a frog in boiling water, I'd sat still while they turned up the heat. I added one more entry. Passwords handed over during my surgery recovery. I was drugged. He knew. My writing turned sharp, the loops tight and angry. I pressed the pen too hard, the page nearly tearing under my hand. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It was a strategy, a campaign. They didn't take my money. They mined me for it. Dug their claws in slowly until I forgot what ownership felt like. I set the notebook down and looked at it. Pages thick with evidence, names, dates, quotes. Not a diary, no. A record, a ledger, a weapon. They thought I was old, distracted, maybe slipping. But now I had proof. And more than that, I had clarity. The tears didn't come. Not anymore. Just a quiet promise whispered into the morning light. You picked the wrong woman to steal from. By the time I walked into Leonard Shaw's office, my hands no longer shook. The folder I carried was thick, not just with paper, but with purpose. That notebook, now backed with copies of emails, bank notices, scribbled memories, even a photo of Rachel's remodeled kitchen from her Instagram feed. I had dates. I had motive. I had a story written in facts they'd assumed I'd never collect. Leonard's office hadn't changed in 20 years. Still smelled like dust, old law books, and that worn leather chair Harold used to sit in when they talked wills and probate. Leonard rose slowly from behind his desk. His hair had turned fully white since I'd seen him last. But his eyes? Still sharp, still steady. Evelyn, he said, taking my hand gently. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. We sat. I handed him the folder. He opened it, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the occasional low hum from his throat. 5 pages in, he stopped, jaw tightening. He looked up at me. This isn't carelessness, Evelyn. This is fraud. I swallowed hard, but nodded. He tapped the page with a knuckle. Co-signed access without consent. Password use under the influence. Manipulation of a senior's financial autonomy. They left a trail, digital and paper, and thank God you documented it. It wasn't just the money, I said, voice low. It was the lying, the pretending. My own son looking me in the eye and acting like he was doing me a favor. Leonard didn't soften. He didn't coddle. You're not the first, he said, but you're one of the few who came in early enough. This is actionable. What they've done falls under elder financial abuse. And depending on how the funds were accessed and used, it could involve federal charges. Good, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I don't want to scare them, I continued. I want them to know they picked the wrong woman, and I want to do this right. Leonard sat back in his chair and nodded, slowly. Then we start with the bank records, he said. And Evelyn, don't speak to them, not a word. Let's gather everything. Once we have it all, we confront them on your terms. I exhaled, not in relief, in resolve. Because for the first time since that awful morning at the bank, I wasn't just a victim. I was building my case. I'd been coming to that bank for over 30 years. Same marble floor, same tinted windows, same manager, Carla Green, who used to compliment my Christmas cookies and ask about Harold's health. I remember when she cried the day I told her he'd passed. But that morning, when Leonard and I stepped into her office, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I didn't waste time. I'd like to see my account history, I said. Every login, every change, every cosigner addition made in the last 18 months. Her eyes flicked to Leonard, then back to me. Of course, Evelyn, but may I ask why? Leonard placed a single sheet of paper on her desk, a preliminary request for full documentation, signed and notarized. Carla hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, the same way a teacher might pause before handing back a failing test. Still, she clicked, typed, scanned, and there it was. My records, spread across the screen in columns and tabs and timestamps. Leonard leaned in. Carla adjusted her glasses. I just stared. There, Leonard said, pointing. That's not Evelyn's login location. That's 4 counties over. Someone accessed your account from a different IP address, Carla added quietly. Several times. And here, Leonard tapped again. New cosigner form filed in February. But Evelyn was recovering from knee surgery then, weren't you? I nodded. My hands clenched in my lap. Let's see the signature, he said. Carla clicked, and there it was, glowing on the screen like a punch to the gut. My name, or some crooked imitation of it. The Y on Evelyn curled in the wrong direction. The loops too big, too round. That wasn't my hand. And just below it, Rachel M. Carson, her full name, neatly typed, neatly signed. She co-signed herself onto your account, Carla murmured, shaking her head slowly. That's not standard. Leonard's voice was ice. Not standard, and not legal without full consent. I stared at my forged signature, at the access history, at the record of withdrawals, large, frequent, timed right around Rachel's sudden renovations, new wardrobe, and spa getaways she never once mentioned. How much did they take? I asked. Carla hesitated. Then she turned the screen toward me. $48,621. I nodded once. No tears, no gasp, just confirmation. They weren't borrowing. They weren't confused. They were looting. And now I had proof. Are you sure you want to see this? Carla asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes, she led us into the back office, a quiet, beige room with nothing but a desk, a monitor, and the low whir of a server in the corner. I'd never seen this part of the bank before. Customers weren't supposed to. But I wasn't a customer anymore. I was a victim, and I was about to look my betrayal in the face. Carla sat at the desk, tapped a few keys, and the video began. At first, the footage was silent and grainy. A standard Tuesday morning. Empty lobby. Then, the glass doors opened. Mark, Rachel, smiling, confident, not a hint of hesitation. She wore a cream blouse and a gold cuff bracelet I remembered admiring at Sunday dinner. He wore that navy jacket I bought him 2 Christmases ago. Said he liked it because it made him look responsible. I watched them walk to the counter like they owned the place. Not rushed, not sneaky, calm, charming. Rachel leaned on the counter, laughing at something the teller said. Mark pulled out their IDs, his first, then hers, and passed them across the marble like it was a game. I recognized the teller. Her name was Jenna. Young, friendly. She'd always called me Miss Evelyn, like I was her favorite teacher. And there she was, typing in my account number, nodding, sliding over the cosigner form. Mark signed first, smooth and casual. Then he handed the pen to Rachel. I watched her bend over the form, signing with her perfect posture, her expensive nails clicking softly on the counter. Then came the worst part. Rachel smiled, wide, victorious, and opened her handbag. Jenna counted the stacks, $9,000. Then another withdrawal, $5,000. A third. Another. Rachel slipped the cash inside, like she was tucking away a grocery receipt. No shame, no worry, just entitlement. Leonard leaned in and muttered, "They're not even trying to hide it. Not shadows, not mistakes, not misunderstandings. Theft in daylight." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, spine straight, hands folded, and watched the child I'd raised rob me with a smile. When the footage ended, I turned to Carla. "I need a copy of that," I said. "Time-stamped, labeled." She nodded. "Of course." Leonard placed a hand on my arm. "We have everything we need now." No, I thought. Now I have everything they need to realize exactly who they're dealing with. I sat in Leonard's car, silent, staring at the manila envelope in my lap. Inside, the bank logs, the forged signature, the co-signer form, and now the security footage. Stamped, dated, and undeniable. "They didn't slip up," I said, finally. Leonard glanced over, but didn't speak. "They didn't make a mistake. This wasn't heat of the moment. They planned it, smiled through it, rehearsed it." I turned my head and looked out the window. We were stopped at a red light. A mother walked past with 2 children, laughing, arms linked. I blinked. I had raised Mark to be that kind of man, loving, protective, good. But something had broken along the way, and now, sitting in that leather seat, it hit me all at once. They didn't think I'd ever figure it out, not because I was naive, but because I was older, because I sometimes ask for help with my phone, because I take longer to count out bills at the store, because I still use paper statements, because I'm no longer useful, in their eyes, just a woman to be managed. That's what stung the most. Not just the money, not even the lies, but the calculation behind it. They looked at me, the woman who raised one of them, welcomed the other, and saw an opportunity, a soft target, a silent one. But I wasn't silent now. I straightened the envelope in my lap. Leonard's car hummed quietly, a soft reminder that time was moving, and so was I. "I think I spent so long trying to be loved," I said, "that I didn't notice when I stopped being respected." Leonard nodded slowly. "It happens more than you think." "I don't want revenge," I said, surprising myself. "I want clarity. I want them to know exactly what they did. I want them to see it laid out in front of them like a mirror." "You'll have that," Leonard said, "and more if you want it." I looked down at the paperwork again. It wasn't just evidence. It was a declaration. They thought I'd be too ashamed, too old, too tired to fight. They thought they'd get away with it. But they had forgotten who raised them, and I had just remembered who I was. I called Mark on Wednesday morning. "Dinner Sunday?" I asked, voice light. "Just the 3 of us. Been too long." He hesitated. I could hear the calculation clicking behind his silence. But then Rachel chimed in faintly from the background. Something about being due for a visit. And, just like that, they said yes. I smiled into the phone. "Perfect. Roast chicken okay?" "Sure, Mom," Mark said. "That sounds great." I hung up and got to work. Not just with the cooking, with the scene. I took out the good dishes. The real silver. Polished them myself, right down to the curve of each spoon. I lit the long candles Harold used to insist made things too fancy for a Tuesday. Set the table with linen napkins folded just so. Everything gleamed. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon zest, the tart cooling on the counter, a playlist of soft jazz humming from the speaker, the kind of music Rachel always called old people ambiance. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them to think nothing was coming. They knew I was traditional, predictable, the kind of mother who'd let the roast do the talking and the past stay buried. Let them believe that. Let them believe I'd forgotten the bank footage, the forged forms, the cosigner line Rachel signed without flinching, the withdrawals, the lies, the smirks. Let them believe I was still the same. At 5:55, I lit the last candle, smoothed my blouse, tucked Harold's briefcase under the sideboard. Leonard arrived at 5:59. He wore his Navy suit, not the one he used in court, but the one he wore to settle matters out of it. Silent, sharp, unshakable. "They're going to think I'm here for dinner," he said. I smiled. "You are." At exactly 6:06, Mark and Rachel walked through the front door. Rachel wore perfume thick enough to taste. Mark had a bottle of red in hand, label turned outward, like I'd be impressed. Rachel air-kissed my cheek and called the table quaint. "Wow, Mom," Mark said, glancing at the candlelight. "What's the occasion?" "Just dinner," I said smoothly. "You two deserve to be spoiled once in a while." He grinned. She smirked. They sat. I served the chicken, poured the wine. We made small talk about weather and work and their latest tight month. And as they reached for the tart, I stood up, walked to the sideboard, picked up Harold's briefcase, and set it down, hard, in the center of the table. Rachel's fork paused midair. Mark's smile twitched. "Before dessert," I said, flipping the latch, "I think we should have a little chat." At the head of the table, I said calmly, is Leonard Shaw, my lawyer. Mark's smile dropped so fast, it was like watching glass shatter in slow motion. Rachel's fork clinked against her plate. Her eyes darted to Mark, then back to me. The air changed. Instantly, the warmth drained from the room. The candles still flickered, but they didn't feel cozy anymore. They felt surgical, exposing. Your lawyer?" Rachel repeated, trying to sound amused. "For what?" Leonard didn't speak. He just folded his hands and waited. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the first sheet, a copy of the forged cosigner form. I slid it gently across the table, stopping it right in front of Mark's untouched wine glass. "I believe this is your signature, and that's mine, or at least the version Rachel attempted." Rachel's face froze. Mark stared at the paper like it might catch fire if he blinked. "Mom," he said carefully, what is this about?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. My words came out measured, sharp. "It's about the $48,621 you withdrew from my account over the past year. It's about passwords taken while I was recovering from surgery. It's about forging my name, accessing my funds, and laughing about it on bank security footage." Mark's face went pale. We didn't." Leonard cleared his throat. Just once. It was the loudest sound in the room. "We have all the records," he said. "Time-stamped logins, security footage, copies of your forged cosigner agreement. We also have evidence that Evelyn was under the influence of prescription pain medication when access was taken, which elevates this from a civil dispute to potential criminal fraud." Rachel dropped her napkin. Her voice sharpened. "You tricked us. You invited us here like this was some warm little—" "I did invite you," I said, leaning forward slightly, "because I wanted to look you in the eye when you realized I wasn't going to die quiet. You thought I wouldn't fight. You thought I wouldn't notice." Mark opened his mouth, then shut it again. He looked like he was trying to calculate how bad this really was. He had no idea. "You broke my trust," I continued, my voice like steel under silk. "You stole from me. You used me. And then you smiled over roast chicken like it never happened." I sat back. Let it hang there. Let them sweat in their own silence. Rachel looked ready to bolt. Mark looked like he was choking on everything he hadn't said yet. "And Leonard?" He just reached into the briefcase again and laid the next file on the table. "Let's continue," he said. "Shall we?" After Leonard slid the next folder across the table, the room went so quiet I could hear the clock tick in the hallway. Rachel didn't touch it. Neither did Mark, so I opened it for them. Here are the transaction records, I said. Every withdrawal, every login from your home IP address, every cent you pulled from my account while telling me you were helping. I watched their eyes move down the page. April 12th, $9,000. May 8th, $5,500. June 3rd, $7,200. On and on. You timed the withdrawals right before long weekends and holiday sales, I added. Very strategic. I almost admire the organization. Mark started shaking his head. Mom, this isn't what you think. I know exactly what it is, I snapped. You thought I was too old, too soft, too tired to notice. You thought I'd stay quiet, maybe forget. You counted on it. I pulled out the printed screenshots of the security footage next. Still frames, Rachel's hand signing the form, Mark smiling at the teller, cash sliding across the counter. I slid those across the table next. Do you recognize yourselves? I asked. Rachel finally spoke, her voice brittle. You've been spying on us? Leonard let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. This is not spying. This is called evidence. The bank released it under Evelyn's legal request. Rachel turned to Mark, whispering harshly. You said everything was clean. And you believed him? I said. My own son has been lying to me for months. Do you really think I believe a word either of you say now? Mark looked up at me, pale, silent. So I said it for him. You didn't think I'd notice. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not just the theft, but how little you thought of me. How confident you were I wouldn't fight back. Leonard placed one more paper in front of them. A letter drafted to the local police department. Unsigned. For now. Rachel's eyes widened. You're bluffing, she said. I met her gaze and smiled. Small and cold. You're used to people bluffing, aren't you? But I've got nothing left to lose. And everything you thought you could keep. Mark's hands curled into fists in his lap. But he said nothing. He didn't need to. Because every lie, every withdrawal, every forged loop of my name was now staring back at them from that table. Not accusation, not theory. Proof. Rachel moved first. She shoved her chair back with a sharp scrape and stood, arms crossed tight over her chest. We were helping you, she hissed. You're the one who said all that tech stuff confused you. We took the stress off your plate. I tilted my head, calm, collected. Helping doesn't usually involve forged documents and secret withdrawals. You gave Mark the passwords. She snapped, eyes flashing toward Leonard like she was daring him to disagree. You trusted him. How's that our fault? Leonard didn't flinch. You used access obtained during a period of medical vulnerability. That alone could warrant charges. Forging Evelyn's signature is another. The paper trail is extensive. You're not arguing with emotion anymore. You're arguing with felony behavior. Rachel's face flushed red. But I didn't look at Leonard. I looked straight at Mark. He was still sitting, shoulders hunched, eyes locked on the table. I spoke softly. Is that true, Mark? Was it helping? He didn't answer, didn't even look at me. So I pushed harder. Did helping include remodeling Rachel's kitchen with my money? Her earrings? The new SUV in your driveway? Mark opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. We thought you didn't need all of it. There it was, the ugly truth. They'd decided for me that I didn't need what I'd worked for, that what was mine was theirs, if they smiled and used soft enough words. I leaned back in my chair, the candlelight flickering against the glass of Harold's briefcase. You didn't ask. You didn't tell me. You took. Mark finally met my eyes, but there was no apology in his face. Just embarrassment. Fear. Maybe a flicker of shame. Come on, Mom, he said, voice lower now. Let's not drag this out. We're family. I let that word hang in the air like smoke. Family. Is that what family does? Waits until you're cut open and drugged on painkillers to steal everything you've got left? I gave you love, I said. Trust. The benefit of every doubt. And you treated me like an obstacle. Rachel scoffed. You're acting like we drained your retirement. You've still got the house. Leonard sat forward slightly. Not anymore. She transferred the deed last week. You're not touching that either. Rachel's face twisted. Unbelievable. No, I said. What you did was unbelievable. This is justice catching up. And for once, they had nothing to say. Just the sound of the silverware cooling on porcelain. I stood up from the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just opened the final folder and placed it between their empty plates, the kind of folder that doesn't carry memories, only consequences. This is your choice, I said, each word as steady as the candle flames around us. You sign this agreement tonight, both of you, and every penny you stole will be returned to me, in full. Mark stared down at the document like it was written in fire. Rachel blinked. And if we don't? Leonard answered for me. Then, on Monday morning, we file criminal charges for elder financial abuse, wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. Every count supported by hard evidence. Rachel laughed, short, nervous. You wouldn't actually do that. You'd put your own son in court? I looked at her. Not with anger, with clarity. I already did the hardest thing, I said. I looked at my son and saw him for who he really is. Court is nothing compared to that. Rachel turned to Mark. Say something. Mark looked like a man trapped in a house he set on fire, only now realizing the exits are gone. She's bluffing, Rachel said, desperate now. She wouldn't drag this into the public. Leonard placed a second copy of the police report draft in front of them. We've already spoken to a contact in the financial crimes unit, he said. They're just waiting on her signature. You've got until the end of this dinner to decide. I added one more thing. If you choose court, that's forever. Your names, your faces, your arrest records. You won't just lose access to my money. You'll lose any chance at repairing what's left between us. Rachel's lips curled, but she didn't speak. Mark looked at me. Finally, really looked at me. And for a brief, bitter moment, I saw my little boy again. The one who used to clutch my hand during thunderstorms. He opened his mouth. I didn't mean for it to get this far. But it did, I interrupted. And you watched it happen. He dropped his eyes. Leonard slid 2 pens across the table. I suggest you read it, he said flatly, but it's non-negotiable. Rachel grabbed a pen first, furious, but cornered. Mark followed, slow, silent. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched them finally put their names on something they couldn't walk away from. And when it was done, I collected the folder, folded it neatly, tucked it back into Harold's briefcase. This dinner, I said quietly, was the last thing you'll ever take from me. Mark's hand trembled as he signed. Rachel's didn't. Hers was fast, angry, a stroke of venom on paper. I didn't thank them. I didn't look up. I just closed the folder, latched Harold's briefcase, and stood. Rachel scraped her chair back again, louder this time. She was already grabbing her bag, muttering under her breath. You ambushed us, she hissed. You lured us here like we were criminals. Leonard stood, slowly. You are criminals. The only reason you're not being handcuffed tonight is because Evelyn gave you this out. Rachel whirled toward me. You'll regret this. No, I said. I regret trusting you. She stormed toward the front door, heels clicking like gunshots against the tile. Mark lingered a second longer. I thought maybe he'd apologize. Maybe he'd say something real. But instead he mumbled, this didn't have to go this far. I met his eyes one last time. It didn't, I said. You made sure it did. And then he followed her out. I stepped onto the porch just as Leonard's car pulled out. The night was quiet. Still. But then I noticed it. A flicker of movement across the street. Mrs. Harrow from next door was out on her porch. She'd seen the cars. The briefcase. Rachel yelling. Her garden hose dangled from one hand. Forgotten. 2 houses down, Tom Bennett stood with his phone pointed toward my driveway, recording. A police cruiser idled at the corner. Leonard had arranged it, just in case the signing turned into a scene. It never needed to intervene, but it was seen. And in a town like this, you only need to be seen once. By Monday morning, the whispers had begun. Rachel looked like a mad woman stomping down the porch. Mark looked like someone just emptied his pockets. I heard it was money. I heard she stole from her own mother-in-law. I always knew that kitchen remodel didn't come from Mark's paycheck. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't have to. The truth had walked out my front door in broad daylight, in heels and guilt, and the camera phone of every neighbor who'd spent years thinking I was just sweet old Evelyn. But I wasn't sweet anymore. I was clear, protected, and very, very done. They left with nothing but their names on a legal agreement, and the weight of everyone finally seeing who they really were. Not whispers behind my back anymore. This time, the shame belonged to them. 3 days later, the money reappeared. A quiet deposit. No note. No apology. Just numbers in my account. Like none of it had happened. But it had happened. And it changed everything. I called my bank, removed every cosigner, changed every password, froze every old login, burned the bridge behind me and never looked back. Then I called Leonard. I want to update my will. We met the next day. Mark's name? Erased. Rachel's? Never stood a chance. The only name left was Lydia, my granddaughter, the one who still calls on Sundays, who brings me violets from the farmer's market, who never asked for a dime. She's the only one who ever looked at me like a person. I told Leonard. When he slid the new will across the desk, I signed it without hesitation. Done. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down with a cup of tea and no fear in my chest. No guilt. No more pretending I didn't see what I saw. Mark thought age made me weak. In truth, it made me patient. And when he finally realized what he'd lost, what he traded for a remodeled kitchen and a few years of stolen comfort, he called. I let it ring. Then I blocked his number, because when someone shows you who they are, believe them and leave them.